I remember that morning as if it were carved into my bones. The sunlight slipped through the lace curtains, gentle and warm, and for a moment, I thought it would be an ordinary day. I was preparing tea when the spoon fell from my hand. I tried to reach for it, but my fingers wouldn't move. Then came the dizziness, slow, heavy, like the world had tilted sideways and left me behind. My heart raced, my breath shortened, and before I could call for help, darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, the room was unfamiliar. The steady beep-beep of machines echoed near my ear, and a plastic tube ran from my arm. My throat was dry, my tongue heavy. I wanted to ask where I was, but my mouth refused to form words. That's when I saw her, my daughter, Claire. She stood near the hospital bed, arms crossed, eyes red, but her face wasn't fear. It was frustration. Something cold twisted in my chest when she sighed instead of smiling. Doctors came and went, whispering words like stroke, recovery, mobility. They sounded distant, like radio static. But I caught one phrase that pierced the fog. She might never walk properly again. My daughter looked down, as if those words were an inconvenience to her schedule. I wanted to scream, to tell her I was still here, alive, feeling everything, but my body betrayed me again, and all I could do was blink. Days passed like ghosts. Nurses fed me soup. The doctor said I was stable, and Claire barely spoke to me except to sign papers. I saw her checking her phone constantly, answering calls in the hallway. Each time she returned, her tone was colder. I began to feel like a burden instead of a mother. I wasn't dead, but the way she looked at me made me wonder if she was already planning my absence. It was only a week later that I heard the first whisper. A nurse mentioned my house. She said something about the daughter handling the property. My heart froze. My house? The one my late husband and I built brick by brick? I tried to ask, to move, to say no, but the paralysis held me captive. That was the day I realized my body wasn't my only prison anymore. My daughter's intentions were about to become one, too. At night, the hospital became a different world. The hallway lights dimmed, machines hummed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and the smell of disinfectant lingered in the air like a memory you couldn't wash away. I couldn't sleep. The silence was too heavy. Every sound felt amplified. The footsteps of nurses, the rolling of carts, the faint echoes of people crying in distant rooms. That's when I first heard her voice through the half-closed door. Claire was talking to someone on the phone, her tone sharp, businesslike. "Yes, it's still under her name," she whispered. "No, she doesn't need it anymore. I'll handle the sale." My blood turned cold. The words sliced through me more painfully than any illness. She was talking about my house. My sanctuary. The place where I'd raised her, where her father and I shared our laughter, our fights, our dreams. And now, she was ready to sell it as if I were already gone. I wanted to scream her name, to tear the tubes from my arms and remind her who I was, her mother, the woman who sacrificed everything to give her a life better than mine. But my tongue felt like stone, my body an unresponsive shell. All I could do was let the tears slip silently down my face, mixing with the smell of antiseptic and betrayal. The next morning, Claire entered the room with fake concern painted across her features. "Mom, how are you feeling?" she asked, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. I looked at her and blinked twice, our old signal for I know. Her smile faltered for a second, but she quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the blanket. That brief moment told me everything. She knew I had heard. Later that day, a social worker came to check on me. Claire stayed close, answering every question before I could even try to form a word. "Yes, she's recovering. Yes, I'll take care of everything. No, she doesn't need to worry about finances." Each sentence was another chain around my freedom. My heart pounded as the realization settled. She wasn't just impatient. She was preparing for a life without me, a life built on what I had earned. That night, as the moonlight spilled through the blinds, I made myself a promise. My body might be weak, but my mind was still alive, sharp, aware, and filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. If my daughter wanted to bury me while I was still breathing, she would soon discover that her mother wasn't ready to die just yet. After 3 long weeks in the hospital, the doctors finally said I could go home. With assistance, they added, handing Claire a list of medications and instructions. I thought I'd feel relief at the idea of returning to my house, the smell of my garden, the warmth of my kitchen, the silence that once felt like peace. But as the car approached the familiar driveway, something inside me twisted. My home didn't feel like mine anymore. Claire rushed ahead of me, unlocking the door and barking orders at the nurse who was helping me walk. "Put her in the guest room," she said. The guest room. My room, the one filled with my husband's photographs and my grandmother's quilt, had been reorganized, as Claire called it. When I finally entered, I saw boxes stacked in the hallway labeled documents, silverware, antiques. It looked less like a home and more like a house being prepared for auction. The air felt colder. The curtains were gone, replaced by plain blinds. My husband's old chair was missing. I asked, struggling to form words, "Where is his chair?" Claire smiled thinly. "Mom, you need space." I decluttered. "It's better this way." I wanted to cry, but I refused to give her that satisfaction. She wasn't decluttering. She was erasing. Erasing me. Erasing us. Each day blurred into the next. Claire kept taking phone calls, always whispering, always stepping into another room. People started visiting, men in suits with clipboards and measuring tapes. One of them nodded politely at me and said, "We'll get this listed by the end of the month." I stared at him, unable to speak, my heart thundering in disbelief. Listed? Listed where? My house. My memories? That night, when everyone was asleep, I wheeled myself down the hall. The boxes were still there, but one had fallen open. Inside, I saw the deed to the house, my name still on it. I ran my trembling fingers across the paper, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Not yet," I whispered to the walls that once held my life. "You will not take this from me." I may have been weak, but something in me, the part that built that home from love and loss, began to wake up again. It was a Wednesday morning when the first stranger walked into my living room. A man in a navy blue suit, carrying a shiny tablet and a forced smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," he said, shaking my limp hand like it was a formality. "Your daughter told me you're considering selling this lovely place. Beautiful structure, by the way." His words were polite, but his tone dripped with business, not compassion. I didn't answer. My throat was still weak, and honestly, what could I say? Considering? I was fighting to stay alive, not to sell my home. Claire hovered nearby, nervously tapping her fingers on her phone. "Mom's been thinking about downsizing," she explained, as if I were some senile old woman who couldn't speak for herself. Downsizing. Another word for erasing history. The realtor nodded, already snapping photos of the house. The fireplace where I'd read stories to Claire as a child. The dining table where we celebrated every Christmas. Now, each click of his camera sounded like a nail sealing my memories inside a coffin. When he left, I tried to speak, to stop her madness. "Claire, no house," I managed to whisper. She sighed dramatically, her voice sharp. "Mom, stop. You need care, not a house you can't even walk around in." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked through me, like I was already gone. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just being practical. She was being cruel, purposefully cold. That evening, a nurse brought my dinner tray while whispering something about the listing. My fork froze midair. I asked her softly, "Listing?" She looked startled, realizing she'd said too much. "Oh, I thought you knew. The agent said they'll list it online next week." I felt the world tilt again, not from illness, but from betrayal. My daughter wasn't just thinking about selling. She'd already started. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, tears pooling in my ears. Memories replayed like broken film reels. Claire as a child, running barefoot through that same hallway she now wanted to sell. Her laughter had once been my purpose. Now it echoed in my mind as a haunting reminder of what love can turn into when greed takes its place. And somewhere between the beeps of the medical machine and the creak of the old house, I made a vow. She might steal my voice, but she would never steal my truth. A week later, I heard the sound again, the clicking of polished shoes on the wooden floor, the metallic snap of a clipboard. The same man who'd come with the realtor walked through my front door, this time without even knocking. "Just here to take a few more measurements," he said casually, flashing a toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. My stomach turned. I hadn't signed anything, hadn't given permission, but there he was, walking through my home as if it already belonged to someone else. Claire followed behind him, pretending not to notice my glare. "Mom, it's just part of the process," she said, her voice coated in fake reassurance. "We're getting appraisals done, so you can have options." Options. That word again, always meaning something she'd already decided for me. I wanted to yell, "You don't get to decide my life." But the word stuck in my throat, heavy and uncooperative. When the man entered my bedroom, I saw something flicker in his expression. Maybe guilt, maybe pity. "Ma'am, are you okay with all this?" he asked softly, as if trying to test whether I was aware of what was happening. I forced my hand to move, trembling, and pointed to the door, "Leave." He hesitated, then nodded slightly, almost apologetically. For a brief moment, I realized not everyone was blind to my daughter's greed. That night, I waited until the house fell silent. The clock ticked past midnight, and the streetlight outside painted long shadows across the floor. I pulled the small notepad from the bedside drawer, the one I used before the stroke to jot down grocery lists, and with a shaky hand, I wrote 3 words: "She is selling." My letters were crooked, uneven, but legible. I hid the note under the cushion of my wheelchair. Somehow, I knew I would need proof that I wasn't as helpless as she believed. The next morning, Claire walked in carrying breakfast and a cheerful smile that didn't match her eyes. "Mom, I've got good news," she said. "We might have a buyer." My spoon clattered against the tray. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from rage. For the first time since my stroke, I felt something stronger than pain, a pulse of fire rising through my veins. If she wanted to play this game, she would soon learn that I was not ready to be erased from my own story. It was on a quiet Thursday that I met the one person who would change everything. Her name was Elena, the new nurse assigned to help during the day shift. She was young but carried herself with an old soul, gentle hands, warm eyes, and a voice that didn't rush me like everyone else did. On her first morning, she noticed how tense I was. "Mrs. Harper," she said softly, "do you want to talk about something?" I blinked once, our small hospital code for yes. That's how it began. Unlike Claire, Elena didn't talk at me. She talked with me. She waited for my slow, broken words to form, even when they came out clumsy and incomplete. "You trust," I murmured one afternoon, pointing at her. She smiled. "You can," she whispered back. It was the first time in months I felt like someone actually saw me, not the fragile body I had become. One afternoon, she overheard Claire on the phone again, loud, impatient, pacing the hallway. "Yes, it's her signature we're waiting for," Claire hissed. "Don't worry, I'll get it done soon." Elena's face stiffened. Later, when she came to check my vitals, she leaned close and whispered, "She's trying to sell your house, isn't she?" I froze. I hadn't told anyone. I only managed a trembling nod. Her expression changed from sympathy to quiet determination. "Then you're not alone anymore," she said firmly. "We'll stop her." From that moment, Elena became more than a nurse. She became my confidant. Each day, we devised small, silent strategies. I told her where the documents were hidden, how Claire had started moving furniture, and where I'd placed the note I wrote that night. She took careful pictures with her phone, saying, "If she pushes too far, we'll have proof." It was risky, but the fear in my chest began to ease. For the first time since my stroke, I felt hope stir again. That evening, I watched from my window as Elena left for the night, waving discreetly so Claire wouldn't notice. My daughter thought she had stripped me of everything: power, dignity, control. But she didn't realize something fundamental. When a mother feels cornered, she doesn't surrender. She adapts. She learns to fight silently. And now I had someone to fight with me. It happened on a rainy morning, the kind of day when the sky feels too heavy, and even the walls seem to listen. Claire came into my room wearing a wide smile. Too wide. "Mom," she said, setting a folder on my lap, "we just need to update some papers for your insurance. Nothing serious." Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes darted to the nurse's station, checking if Elena was around. She wasn't. My pulse quickened. Something was wrong. She handed me a pen, placing her manicured finger exactly where she wanted my trembling hand to land. "Just a small signature," she said, "so we can handle your care more efficiently." My fingers wouldn't cooperate. The letters looked like tangled strings on the page, barely legible. Claire sighed dramatically, snatched the paper, and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'll fix it for you." Her voice turned colder, sharper, almost mechanical. That's when I realized she wasn't fixing it. She was forging it. That night, when Elena returned, I told her everything. My voice was weak, but my eyes did the talking. She checked the drawer and found the document. When she held it up to the lamp, we both saw it, my name written twice. Once by my trembling hand, and once smooth, confident, unmistakably not mine. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "She's trying to transfer the deed." We acted fast. Elena took pictures of every page, every signature, every timestamp. She hid the copies at her locker at the clinic and another set on her cloud storage. "If she dares to go further, we'll stop her," she promised. But even with that assurance, I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart pound. My daughter, my only child, was becoming a stranger I no longer recognized. The next morning, I pretended to nap as Claire entered quietly, carrying the folder again. She whispered into her phone, "Yes, I have the papers. I'll bring them to the lawyer this afternoon." My breath caught in my throat. My heart ached in ways no stroke could ever cause. She thought I couldn't hear, but I heard everything. That was the morning my love for her broke, not into anger, but into sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. Still, deep inside that sorrow, something fierce was forming, a mother's resolve to rise, even when everyone believes she can't. Elena didn't tell me until the next day what she'd done. She came into my room early, her hair damp from the morning rain, eyes glowing with determination. "I followed her," she whispered. My heart skipped. "Claire?" I managed to ask, my voice barely more than air. Elena nodded. "To a lawyer's office downtown, Hollister and Crane." She was carrying that same folder. I waited outside until she came out. My stomach twisted. Part of me wished she hadn't confirmed what I already feared. She told me Claire had spent nearly an hour inside. When she emerged, she looked pleased, even triumphant. Elena caught a glimpse through the glass window, the lawyer shaking her hand, the folder back in her purse. "It wasn't insurance paperwork, Mrs. Harper," Elena said gravely. "She filed to transfer ownership of your house." The room tilted for a second, my vision blurring. I gripped Elena's hand tightly, forcing myself to breathe. "Not dead," I whispered. "She knows," Elena replied softly. "But she's pretending you already are." The betrayal settled into me like ice. I thought of every night I'd stayed awake when she was a child, every bruise I kissed better, every dream I sacrificed so she could have hers. And now she was erasing me from my own life, with a pen, a smile, and a forged signature. The cruelty wasn't just in her actions. It was in how easily she did it. No hesitation. No guilt. Elena promised she'd take care of the legal side. "We need to alert someone," she said. "But we have to be careful. If she knows we're onto her, she could destroy the evidence." That night, she secretly contacted a friend of hers, a paralegal, and shared copies of the forged document. "Keep it safe," she instructed him. I listened from my bed, unable to speak, but silently thanking whatever force had sent Elena into my life. When Claire returned home later, her perfume filled the hallway before she did. She kissed my forehead like a loving daughter would. "Everything's fine, Mom," she said, her voice sugar-coated. "You don't need to worry about a thing." But I could see it now, the flicker of deceit behind her eyes. She thought she'd already won. What she didn't know was that her mother had allies in places she couldn't imagine. And for the first time in weeks, I felt power returning to me, not through my limbs, but through truth. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Claire rushed to answer it before I could even react. "Mr. Crane." "What a surprise," she said, her tone high-pitched and falsely cheerful. From my chair in the living room, I could see the man's outline, tall, gray suit, leather briefcase in hand. The lawyer. My stomach tightened. He stepped in, glancing around with polite discomfort. "I just needed a few clarifications on the deed paperwork," he said. My heart pounded in my chest. Paperwork. That word again. Claire guided him into the dining room, closing the door halfway. But the house was old, and the walls carried every word like echoes meant for me. "My mother agreed to the sale," Claire said quickly. "She just can't speak much since her stroke." Mr. Crane hesitated. "I understand," he replied carefully, "but I do need to verify consent personally. Legally, it's mandatory." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Claire laughed lightly, saying, "Oh, of course. She's resting now. I can bring the form signed." My chest tightened. Lies wrapped in honey. A few minutes later, Mr. Crane excused himself to use the restroom, but instead, he walked toward the living room. Our eyes met. For a second, the air froze. He looked startled to find me alert, aware, watching. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, "how are you feeling?" I struggled but forced out the words, "Not dead yet." His eyebrows shot up, realization dawning in his face. He smiled faintly, not out of joy, but in quiet shock. He nodded, then turned to leave, saying only, "Take care of yourself, ma'am." When he left, Claire's expression had changed. She looked pale, almost trembling. "Mom," she said, closing the door behind her. "What did you say to him?" I blinked slowly, once, twice. No words, only the truth in my eyes. She glared at me, her facade cracking for the first time. "You're not making this easy," she hissed, before storming down the hall. That was the moment I knew the mask had slipped. For weeks she'd treated me like a helpless ghost. Now, for the first time, she realized I was still alive and watching. Later that evening, Elena returned and listened carefully to everything. "That was good," she said. "He knows something's off. He might hesitate to process the sale." I smiled faintly, exhaustion in my bones but hope in my chest. My silence had spoken louder than any scream could. The walls of deceit were beginning to crack, and soon, light would start to pour through. Something in the air shifted after the lawyer's visit. The atmosphere inside the house grew dense, almost electric, like the calm before a storm. Claire no longer hummed around the kitchen or spoke in that sweet, fake tone. She moved quickly, her voice sharper, her steps heavier. Every time she looked at me, her eyes carried a silent accusation, as if I were the one betraying her. It was ironic, really. The guilty always find ways to feel like the victim. One night, I heard her pacing in the hallway, whispering on the phone. "He knows she's still aware," she said in a hiss. No, I didn't expect that. She's talking, not clearly, but enough to ruin everything. Her voice trembled slightly. "We need to move faster." My heart pounded so loudly, I thought she might hear it. Move faster? What did that mean? Sell the house? Forge more papers? Or worse? I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound felt like a threat creeping closer. The next morning, she stormed into my room. "Mom," she said tightly, "we need to have a serious talk." I stayed silent. "Why are you doing this?" she snapped. "You think I'm the enemy? I'm trying to help you. You can't live here anymore. You don't even remember half of what's happening." Her words were like knives, cutting through the air. I wanted to yell, "I remember everything," but my throat betrayed me. So I did the only thing I could. I turned my face away. That silence broke her. She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Elena arrived minutes later, concern in her eyes. I told her what happened, my voice trembling. She nodded, her jaw set. She's cracking, she said. That means we're close. That day, Elena made a call to the lawyer, pretending to be my medical advocate. She explained, carefully, firmly, that the sale might be under false pretenses. Mr. Crane listened quietly, then said, "Thank you for telling me. I'll look into it." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt, the first spark of truth in a field of lies. That night, Claire didn't come home. The silence was almost peaceful. I sat in the dark living room, looking at the pictures on the wall, my late husband holding baby Claire, my own younger face full of hope. I touched the frame and whispered, "I raised her better than this." But maybe that was the hardest truth of all, that love doesn't always save someone from themselves. Sometimes, love is just the reason we endure the pain long enough to fight back. The next morning began with the sound of drawers slamming. From my room, I could hear Claire muttering under her breath, her frustration growing louder with each passing minute. "Where are they?" she hissed. "They were right here." The sound of paper being shuffled, cabinets being yanked open. It filled the house like thunder. I stayed still, my breath shallow. I didn't need to ask what she was looking for. I already knew. Moments later, she burst into my room. Her eyes were wild, her hair slightly undone. The polished mask of control she'd worn for weeks was cracking. "Mom," she said, trying to steady her voice, "did you move any of the documents from the drawer?" I looked at her silently. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. I just stared. That, somehow, infuriated her even more. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" she shouted. "You're trying to make me look like a monster." Then, as quickly as the rage appeared, it melted into fake tears. "I'm just trying to help you," she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. But even her touch felt poisonous now. What she didn't know was that the missing papers weren't lost. They were safe. Elena had taken them the night before. After speaking to the lawyer, she'd quietly slipped into the study and removed the folder from the drawer, tucking it into her bag. "It's too risky to leave these here," she'd whispered to me. I agreed. My body was fragile, but the truth was now protected, away from my daughter's reach. All day, Claire searched. I watched her through the crack in the door, her composure unraveling. She called someone on the phone, the same man's voice I'd heard before. "They're gone," she barked. "No, I don't know how. Someone must have taken them." Her panic made something stir inside me. Not joy, not revenge, but justice. For the first time, I could see fear in her eyes. The roles were shifting. The predator was beginning to feel hunted. That night, she barely spoke to me. She paced the hallway, muttering to herself, her once confident stride replaced by restless energy. I sat quietly in my bed, my heart calm for the first time in weeks. The truth had started its silent march, slow, steady, unstoppable. And deep inside, I knew, when the truth finally arrived at her door, it wouldn't knock. It would break it down. The following morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual. Her eyes were sharp, purposeful. She closed the door behind her, placed her bag on the table, and whispered, "We need proof, something undeniable." She opened the bag and pulled out a small, black camera, no bigger than her palm. "It records both video and audio," she explained softly. "If she tries anything again, threats, coercion, manipulation, we'll have evidence no one can ignore." My heart raced, half in fear, half in gratitude. I nodded slowly. This was dangerous but necessary. That afternoon, while Claire was out, Elena installed the camera in the corner of my bedroom, blending it with the curtains. "It'll capture everything," she said. "She won't notice a thing." She positioned another small microphone near the lamp beside my bed. "If she ever talks about the sale or the forged documents again, we'll catch her in her own words." I felt a chill run through me, not from fear, but from the realization that the truth was about to have a voice again, even if mine was broken. When Claire returned home, she seemed different, quieter, more suspicious. She walked into my room with a forced smile, the kind that hides something ugly underneath. "You've been having a lot of visitors lately, haven't you?" she asked. I blinked once. That nurse, she's getting too involved. Her voice darkened. "Maybe I'll request someone else." My pulse spiked. I tried to keep calm, knowing the camera was rolling. Every venomous word was being recorded, every sneer preserved in perfect clarity. She sat on the edge of my bed, leaning close. "You think people are going to believe you?" she whispered. "You can barely talk. You can't even write straight. When this house is gone, no one will question it." She smirked and stood, adjusting the curtains, unknowingly brushing right past the tiny lens watching her. The irony almost made me smile. For weeks, she'd tried to silence me. Now, her own words would destroy her. That night, Elena returned and checked the footage. Her eyes widened as she listened to Claire's threats. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and relief. "She's finished." She uploaded the file to a secure drive, naming it for Mrs. Harper, Truth. For the first time, I felt something powerful return dignity. My voice had been taken from me, but the universe had found another way to make me heard. It happened 3 days later. The doorbell rang again, but this time, the sound carried a strange weight, the kind that warns you life is about to change. Claire hurried to answer it, forcing her usual cheerful tone. "Yes," she said. Then I heard a calm, official voice reply, "Good morning, ma'am. We're from Adult Protective Services. We received a report of possible financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Claire stammered. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly. "My mother's fine. She's just recovering from a stroke." The agents asked to come in. I saw them from my room. 2 people, a man and a woman, both wearing badges, their faces kind but serious. They introduced themselves to me, their voices gentle. "Mrs. Harper, we're just here to make sure you're safe." I blinked once, then twice. Our signal for yes. For the first time, those blinks mattered. Claire hovered behind them, smiling nervously. "Mom, tell them everything's fine," she said, her voice shaky. I looked at her, straight into her eyes, and slowly shook my head. The agents exchanged a glance. That was the moment the tide turned. Elena appeared shortly after, her timing perfect. "I'm her nurse," she said firmly, "and I have something you need to see." She handed them a small flash drive. "It's all on here, recordings, documents, forged signatures. Everything." The agents listened to the audio right there, in the living room. Claire tried to snatch the device, but the male agent stopped her. Her voice echoed through the room, her threats, her mocking laughter, her words about selling the house. Every lie she'd told was now evidence. She paled, her hands trembling. "This is out of context," she cried. "You don't understand." But no one was listening anymore. Truth had finally spoken louder than her excuses. When they left, Claire disappeared into her room, slamming the door. The house went silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt peaceful, almost sacred. Elena knelt beside me and whispered, "It's over." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me knew there was one more chapter to come, the confrontation between a mother and the daughter who forgot what love truly means. And when that moment arrived, I would be ready. That evening, the house felt different. The air was thick, charged, like a storm waiting to break. Claire hadn't come out of her room since the investigators left. I could hear her pacing, muttering, crying, then pacing again. Part of me wanted to knock on her door, to hold her the way I used to when she was little. But the part of me that had survived betrayal, humiliation, and silence knew better. Love without boundaries becomes weakness, and I had no strength left to waste. Finally, she emerged. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara smudged. She looked at me, not as a daughter, not even as a stranger, but as someone cornered. "How could you do this to me?" she said, voice trembling. I blinked slowly. She continued, "You ruined everything. Do you know what they'll think of me now? That I'm a monster? After everything I've done for you." Her voice cracked on that last word. "Done for you." The irony was almost unbearable. I wanted to tell her that she had done this to herself. That greed doesn't just steal money, it rots the soul. But instead, I reached for my notepad. My hand shook as I wrote, one letter at a time. You sold love for comfort. When I turned it toward her, she stared at it for a long time, her lips trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I was scared. The bills, the house, the debt. She trailed off, her excuses crumbling into sobs. For the first time in months, I found my voice, weak but firm. I was scared too. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to speak. But I didn't betray you. Each word cost me strength, but I forced them out. She fell to her knees beside my bed, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I saw the child she once was, small, frightened, lost. And my heart broke all over again, not from hate, but from the cruel truth that even monsters are made, not born. Elena entered quietly, standing in the doorway, watching us. She didn't interrupt. She just let the silence fill the room, heavy and healing at once. Claire finally looked up, her eyes red. What happens now? She whispered. I met her gaze and said the only thing that felt true. Now you've faced yourself. The words hung in the air like a prayer, or maybe a sentence. Either way, the truth had finally found its voice. The days that followed moved in slow motion, like the quiet after a thunderstorm when the damage is still being counted. Claire stayed in the house but barely spoke. The investigators returned with more questions, more papers, more signatures, this time real ones. They brought a lawyer from the state, kind but firm, who explained everything to me carefully. Mrs. Harper, he said, we've confirmed the attempted transfer was fraudulent. Your daughter could face serious legal charges. Do you wish to press them? His words hung in the air like a weight I wasn't sure I could lift. I looked at Claire sitting across the room, her eyes hollow, her shoulders slumped. For the first time in years, she looked small, not in body but in spirit. My heart twisted. She had done something unforgivable, but she was still my child. I thought of my late husband, of the promise we made to raise her with love. What would he have done? I closed my eyes and whispered the answer only a mother could give. No jail. Just truth. The lawyer nodded slowly, respecting the decision. We'll secure your estate, ma'am, he said gently. She'll have no access to it without your explicit approval. I thanked him with my eyes. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming peace. Justice had already been served in a quieter, deeper way. She'd been forced to look into the mirror and see what she had become. After they left, Claire approached me. Her voice was almost childlike. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I don't know who I am anymore. I wanted to tell her that healing doesn't start with fixing, it starts with facing. I reached out my hand, frail but steady, and she took it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Two women bound by blood and broken promises, both scarred by what had happened, both still human enough to feel the ache of love beneath the ruin. That night, for the first time since my stroke, I slept deeply. The fear that had haunted every corner of the house was gone. The air felt lighter, almost forgiving. I dreamed of my husband standing by the old oak tree in the backyard, smiling the way he used to. You did well, he said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. The morning light crept gently across my room, golden and forgiving. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the air, faint but unforgettable. I sat by the window with a pen in my trembling hand and a blank sheet of paper on my lap. Words had always been my comfort, my way of understanding the chaos of life. And now, with so much left unsaid, I knew I had to write. Not for her, not even for justice, but for me. Dear Claire, I began. The ink bled slightly into the paper, fragile like the memories it carried. You broke my heart in ways I never thought possible. You saw my weakness and mistook it for absence. You tried to erase me, but love doesn't vanish just because it's betrayed. My eyes blurred with tears, but I kept writing. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go. The weight of anger would crush me before any illness could. I paused, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper steadying my thoughts. I raised you to believe that love was stronger than fear. Maybe I failed somewhere along the way. Maybe I gave too much, or maybe you never learned where love ends and greed begins. But I still believe you can find your way back, not to me, but to yourself. My breath trembled as I wrote the next line. When you do, I hope you remember who built the walls you tried to sell and why they were built with love, not money. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my jewelry box, the one Claire used to play with as a child. I didn't plan to send it. Some words are meant to live quietly, waiting for time to reveal their purpose. I knew she might find it one day, long after I was gone, and maybe, just maybe, it would reach the part of her heart that still remembered what it meant to be loved. As I set the pen down, I felt an unfamiliar calm wash over me. I wasn't the woman who'd been silenced in a hospital bed anymore. I wasn't the victim of deceit or pity. I was simply a mother, wounded, wiser, but free. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final act of strength. The weeks passed quietly after the storm. Claire had moved out temporarily, saying she needed time to think. I didn't stop her. Sometimes, distance is the only mirror that reflects truth. The house was finally peaceful again. No more lies whispered through the walls. No strangers walking through my memories with clipboards. Just the soft hum of the wind through the curtains and the sound of my heartbeat, steady and patient. It was in that stillness that I made my next decision, one born not of anger, but of clarity. Elena helped me call my lawyer, Mr. Crane, the same man who'd once unknowingly stepped into the web of deceit. When he arrived, I could see the respect in his eyes, the understanding of what I'd endured. "Mrs. Harper," he said gently, "what would you like to do?" I took a deep breath and whispered, "Rewrite my will." His eyebrows lifted, but he nodded without question. We spent hours together, every word deliberate, every sentence a piece of truth laid bare. I left the house to no one, at least not directly. Instead, it would go to a charitable trust under my name, with one condition. If Claire ever found her way back, not just physically but morally, she could inherit it again. If she changes, I told Mr. Crane, if she learns what love means, then she'll earn what she once tried to steal. He smiled softly, as if he understood this was more than paperwork. It was closure. When the new documents were signed and sealed, I asked Elena to place them in the safe. No more hidden folders, I joked weakly. She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for," she said. I wanted to tell her that strength isn't loud, it's the quiet refusal to let pain define you. But I just smiled instead. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. The same oak tree where my husband once carved our initials stood strong, unbothered by time or storms. I whispered into the stillness. I kept my promise. Not just to him, but to myself. To live with dignity. To love without surrender. To forgive without forgetting. And somewhere, deep down, I hoped that one day Claire would make a promise of her own, one that began where mine left off. It was late autumn when the knock came. The leaves had turned golden and brittle, and the air carried that familiar chill that always made the house feel larger, emptier. I was in the living room, sipping tea, when Elena opened the door and froze. There stood Claire. Her hair was shorter, her clothes simple, her face pale and thinner. But it was her eyes that struck me, softer, quieter, like a storm that had finally exhausted itself. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was fragile, almost childlike. I nodded slowly. She entered hesitantly, glancing around as though stepping into a place both sacred and haunted. "It looks the same," she murmured. I could hear the ache in her tone, the nostalgia of someone seeing the ruins of her own mistakes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't angry anymore. It was heavy with all the things we didn't know how to say. Finally, she broke it. "I've been in therapy," she whispered. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I thought I was desperate, but maybe I was just lost. Her confession hung in the air like a prayer. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But wounds that deep don't heal overnight. They need proof, not promises. Why now? I managed to ask. She swallowed hard. Because I saw what I became when I lost you. And I don't want to be that person anymore. She knelt beside me, tears spilling freely. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Mom. I just want to try to love you again, the right way this time. Elena watched quietly from the doorway, her eyes glistening. I placed a trembling hand on Claire's cheek, the same cheek I used to kiss goodnight when she was small. For a moment, time folded in on itself, and all the anger, fear, and sorrow dissolved into something softer. Love, right way, I whispered. She nodded, clutching my hand. There was no grand reconciliation, no cinematic music swelling in the background. Just two women, broken and mending in the same breath. That night, as I watched her sleep on the couch, the same couch where she once laid her head as a child after nightmares, I realized that sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with apologies. It arrives with presence, with the simple act of returning, not to a house, but to the truth. And as the moonlight wrapped the room in silver, I whispered a silent prayer. Let her stay. The first morning after Claire's return, I woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside. When I looked through the window, I saw her in the garden, kneeling beside the old rose bush, the same one her father planted the year she was born. She was pruning it clumsily, her fingers shaking from the cold, her face calm but distant. Watching her there, I felt a strange peace, fragile, like something that might shatter if I breathed too loudly. When she came inside, her hands were covered in soil. I thought the roots were dead, she said softly. But they weren't. They just needed water. She wasn't talking about the roses, and we both knew it. That was the first time since everything happened that I smiled at her, not out of politeness, but out of quiet understanding. Sometimes love doesn't need words. Sometimes it's just the act of tending something broken until it blooms again. Days turned into weeks, and the house began to feel alive once more. Claire started helping with small things, making tea, reading to me, playing the same old records her father loved. There were still awkward silences, moments when the air grew heavy with memories of what she'd done. But beneath that, something tender was growing, the slow, hesitant rhythm of forgiveness. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a garden that takes patience to bloom. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she brought me a small wooden box. I found this while cleaning, she said. Inside were photos, birthdays, summers, vacations, fragments of a life I thought she'd forgotten. I want to remember us like this again, she whispered. I reached for her hand and held it. No speeches, no apologies. Just touch, warm, real, human. For the first time, it didn't feel like mother and daughter divided by guilt. It felt like two souls rebuilding trust, one breath at a time. That night, I looked out at the garden again. The rosebush glowed faintly in the moonlight, its petals trembling in the wind. I realized then that second chances aren't given. They're cultivated. They grow slowly, through forgiveness, effort, and faith. And though we were still far from whole, the garden and my heart were proof that love, when it chooses to rise again, can survive even the darkest storms. The winter sunlight fell softly through the kitchen window, warming the old wooden floor. I sat quietly with a cup of tea, feeling the gentle hum of life moving through the house again. It no longer felt haunted by betrayal or fear. It felt alive, breathing, forgiving, whole. The same walls that once heard arguments and lies now held laughter again, faint and fragile, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. This house hadn't just survived with me. It had healed with me. Claire was in the garden, trimming the roses. I watched her through the glass, her movements slow, deliberate, tender. There was no rush in her anymore, no hunger for control or wealth. Just stillness. Sometimes, she'd glance toward the window and smile, a small, sincere smile that didn't ask for forgiveness, but offered presence. That was enough. Healing doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it means creating something entirely new on the ashes of what's been lost. Elena still visited often. She'd bring flowers, sit for tea, and tell me stories about her patients, some sad, some hopeful. "You've changed her life," she said once, nodding toward Claire. I smiled faintly and shook my head. "No," I whispered. "She changed her own." There was a lesson in that, one I wished every mother could understand. We can't save our children from their darkness, but if we love them long enough, we can light a candle that guides them home. As evening fell, I wheeled myself toward the front door and looked out at the horizon. The house glowed in the amber light, the same home that had seen love, betrayal, forgiveness, and rebirth. It stood just as I did, weathered but unbroken. I ran my hand along the wall and whispered, "We made it." Because it wasn't just a structure of wood and stone. It was a memory, a witness, a soul that had chosen to stay, just like me. In the quiet that followed, I realized something profound. I hadn't merely survived a stroke. I'd survived being forgotten, deceived, and erased, and still found a way to love. That was the truest miracle of all. The body may falter, but the spirit, the part of us that forgives, endures, and rebuilds, is what keeps a home and a heart alive.